Angelo Giuliano is a great friend of the show. We've spoken to him many times before. He's a political and financial analyst and long-time resident of China. And he joins us now at an unearthly hour. Angelo, I'm really grateful to you for that. We've got a poll running. The West is being hypocritical in condemning China's COVID lockdown policies. On Twitter, 93% say yes, they are being hypocritical. On YouTube, 93%. And on Telegram, 95%. So the hypocrisy isn't working. How does it look to you in China?
Well, it's very interesting. I'm here on the ground, and I'm going to give you the scale of the protests that made the headlines all around the world. If you ask average Joe in China, you ask, did you see the protest? They will say, what? What protest? What are you talking about? I'm going to give you some figures, and keep in mind that China has 1.4 billion people. The protest last Saturday, the largest protest, in all around China, the total was probably around 10,000 people protested in the street peacefully. For a country of 1.4 billion people. I'm going to compare to what we had in Switzerland. In Switzerland, a country that is 200 times smaller than China, we had 100,000 people going to the streets because of COVID protest. So in scales, if you compare, we are talking about protests 2,000 times less than what we had in Switzerland. So it's a very tiny minority. That doesn't mean that some people are discontent, are tired of COVID lockdown. To be honest, I do not agree with the zero COVID policy. I'm against vaccines as well. But the question is, do the Chinese government need to please me or need to please the Chinese? And right now, at this present moment, there is still a majority of people in China that agree with the government. You need also to keep in mind that China is basically in a hybrid war against the collective West. China has been attacked on many, many different fronts. In Xinjiang, terrorists have been financed by the US. For separatist, they've been financing separatist and terrorist groups actually in Xinjiang. They've been funding separatist groups in Hong Kong. We had 2 attempts of color revolution in Hong Kong. And also, very important, China is very afraid of potential bio-warfare. You saw recently in Ukraine, we discovered there were lots of bio labs. What those biolabs are trying to do is to find some virus that actually would match a certain DNA. Well, COVID-19 is not the first time that China has such problem. Remember in 2003, China had SARS. SARS, the spread was not as wide as COVID-19, but the mortality rate was 11%. So China is very, very afraid. So when you look from outside, it seems like irrational. Why would they go through such pain to contain a virus that actually is no worse than the flu? Well, there are more reasons. And Chinese people, they believe in their government because, it's a very capable government, and they know that it's ultimately to save people, to save life, but maybe there's also some reasons that are related to bio-warfare. So important. There's also something so very, very important that people need to understand that what happened in China, there is the foreign hands behind some protest here. It's somehow an attempt of color revolution. How do color revolutions start? Usually they start with the legitimate grievances. They hijacked legitimate movement. So when you look at what happened in Shanghai, there were some Telegram channels, which, by the way, those Telegram channels, they were open in October already. Some Telegram channels were actually monitoring the protest. If you look at who was in those Telegram channels, you had all the major Western news. You had CNN, you had Radio Free Asia, you had the New York Times, you had the sect Falun Gong, which is financed by USAGM, propaganda arm of the US. And very important, the people managing those Telegram channels were all Chinese living outside China, and actually also a prominent dissident that was actually part of the 1989 Color Revolution attempt in Beijing, Tiananmen Square, which is who's financed by some NGOs. So you see, they were taking those protests in Shanghai. They were taking orders from outside China. So very, very important. There are
that's pretty. Let me wind that back, because that's quite significant news that you're bringing us. You're saying that one of the people organizing the Shanghai protests, which, as you said, reached around 10,000 people across the whole of China, one of the organizers was one of the organizers of the Tiananmen Square events. Who is this person and where are they?
While we are talking, I think it's Xiu Fenzhong. I'm going to get you the name. I don't have it. 1 second. Zhou Fenshuo. I have his bio right here. Zhou Fenshuo was a key student leader who helped organize the Great Democratic Movement in Tiananmen Square. Well, keep in mind, it was nothing about democracy there. You know, there were savages. 300 people died in reality in Tiananmen. Actually, nobody died in Tiananmen Square, but in Beijing, during that period, 300 people died, but half of them, 150 soldiers and policemen, were beaten to death. Some were even burned to death. You know, so those are the real information about what happened back then. But this is one of the first color revolution that we experienced. So you see those people. Maybe in other places in outside Shanghai, more inside in third tier cities, they were probably, you know, organic protests. But the scale for a country of 1.4 billion people, it was maximum 10,000 people protesting in 50 different cities. In some cases, in one city, you had only 2 or 3 protesters. That's how big it was.
And let me ask this. Why are the Chinese government so firm about lockdown? They presumably pray in aid that only 5,000 people or so have died from COVID in China, as compared to well over 1 million in the United States, and countries like Britain and France and Italy and so on, also huge death tolls. Are they still as resolute and committed to the current policy, the policy they followed from the beginning? Or is there any crack appearing in intellectual circles, in political circles, about whether the cost of these lockdowns in economic terms and in terms of opportunity cost, money spent on COVID cannot be spent on cancer and on the mental health of the people, of being continually tested, continually locked down?
You're absolutely right. If in the early days of COVID-19, the mortality rate was higher. If you were to take the rates that we had in the US, for population of China would be 5 million people dying. And this would have been unacceptable for Chinese. The responsibility of the government is to protect their people. But now, after 3 years, there's a frustration. People do want to open up, and the government has listened. The last 2 days, they're actually starting to relax the zero COVID policies, and I think they are gradually getting out of this. I think it's absurd. It is an absurd policy, but they might have other reasons. but they want to go slowly because it seems like they're unprepared for a big wave all at once. Just the capacity, hospital capacity is not there yet. And keep in mind that they haven't forced people to take vaccines. So, they worried that, especially for the older people, that this would be a heavy cost to pay. And just they have a different concept of life and people's protection. They look at society as a whole. It's less individualistic. So this is why they've been so compliant when it comes to a zero COVID policy. But things are changing and the government is listening. It's going to relax, and China is going to open up.
Now, there's been some good news for China this week. The government in Taiwan, widely held to be an instrument of the United States anti-China policy and harboring separatist ambitions, was roundly defeated in the local elections in Taiwan, and the KMT, Kuomintang, the traditional founders of Taiwan, who, whatever else you can say about them, are Chinese nationalists. They don't believe that Taiwan is a separate country from China. They had a very significant victory. Tell us about that.
Let me give you first the background of Tsai Ing-wen. Tsai Ing-wen, she was actually selected by the US already back in 2004. She was, according to some WikiLeaks cables, she was having secret meetings with AIT, which is the American Institute of Taiwan, which is, by the way, the de facto US embassy in Taiwan. So she's been working very closely with the US embassy there. And so they selected her, and actually they groomed her, and they made sure that she would be, on the front for being elected. So she is the replica for Taiwan. She's the replica of what you have Zelensky in Ukraine. Exactly the same. Why? Because for 15 years she's been actually reporting to the U.S. embassy. Just make some research. WikiLeaks, Tsai Ing-wen, and you will see she had secret meetings already back then. So this is for the background. Now she's been elected in 2020. Why she was elected? It's because there was the attempt of color revolution in Hong Kong. So they started massively those riots there, and the support she had back then, just before the riots in Hong Kong, was 35%. After the riots, she went up to 60%. She was not popular on the first place, but she won because of fear mongering about China. Now she's been ruling for a while, and people are very unhappy. Why? Because she's been focusing too much on creating tensions with their major trading economic partner, because Taiwan is actually de facto reunited with the mainland. 50% of import and export of Taiwan is with the mainland. So it's de facto reunited with Taiwan. Also, one more thing is that you have also 2 million Taiwanese that work in the mainland. So you have very, very deep connections. So she's been dividing Taiwan and the mainland. And people realize that, you are supposed to work for well-being, and you're focusing too much on geopolitics. So the vote you had last weekend was clearly a vote of no confidence. My biggest fear is that we are in 2024, when they are going to re-elect another president. Well, they might do the same as they did in 2020, start creating some clashes between mainland China and Taiwan, and that you would have actually, again, talks, the fear-mongering talks to push Taiwanese to vote more for pro-independence. And keep in mind, there's why people are so much anti-China. Whenever they hear China, this China bad, there was a bill passed by the Congress on $500 million per year on negative coverage on China. Just think for 1 second, how much can you do with that money to manipulate the masses? Manufacturer consent. It's massive, the bad coverage you're having about China. But again, you have deep pockets institutions that actually, this is the position of a loser. Why don't you fight China with, normal means, trade, competition? There are other ways, when you are playing sports, why would you be go against the rule just to kill your adversary and somehow just to be on the front? Paying for bad coverage of your opponent
Angelo,
is very low.
Angelo, let me, as you brought up sport, let me go left field on you. I'm looking at the World Cup. I'm seeing all kinds of countries, some of them absolutely tiny. Uruguay, for example, a population of 3.5 million, only half of whom are men. So 1.75 million men. And they're in the World Cup finals every single time. In fact, they've won it twice. I see other small countries like Wales, for example, and many others. Where is China? Why is China not in the World Cup? Why are they not better at football than they currently appear to be?
Well, it is not a traditional sport in China. China has been going to football only recently. China, they're good in other sports. It's just not what they do. I'm Italian. I grew up in Switzerland. I started playing football in the street since I was 5 years old. That's what you do. In China, the first sport they start playing it's not football. Maybe they might have some interest when they go to high school, but it's not like something which is deep in our culture. In Europe, in some countries like Italy, Spain, we play, we breathe soccer. That's for a lot of kids, that's their lives. For China, they like watching footballs, but it's not a sport which, historically China hasn't been much into football, but it's getting very popular. Now you have kids starting early, and probably we might see China getting better at football in the future.
Well, I hope so. Angelo, it's a pleasure as always talking to you. You've set us right on a number of things, and I'm grateful to you for it.